back to the Rick Smith Show.
1:18, that reads, though they know God's righteous decree that those who do such issues deserve loss of life. Talking about the gays, of course. And making sure that the faithful there know it. And putting that, they deserve this in the same context of talking about people who are of the LGBTQ community. And also, singling out the transgender folks as well. And look, this is what you expect from them because they're fighting back against the Equality Act, because they don't want to see a piece of legislation go through that as a matter of law, they're not going to be able to have their hate. They're not going to be able to do the hate stuff. And this is one of those weird things to me, because I always look at this and go, if you don't want to do it, don't. I was going to say no one's shoving it down your throat, but that would be the wrong kind of analogy. Or maybe it is. Nobody's making these folks do any of this stuff. It's not their lives. And this is one of those moments where I go back to something my grandfather always said. He always said, don't worry about me, worry about yourself. Take care of what you got to do. Worry about what goes on in your four walls. But what's interesting is these very same people who are pushing this agenda are basically tied to the white supremacist movement. These are the same characters. And it's interesting how it all comes back to this extreme religion. This extreme, way out Christianity. And, for years I've been saying, Rick Santorum wants everyone to say, Islamo-fascists and, Islamic terrorism. Where are the people saying Christian fascism and Christian terrorism? The goofy looking kid with the whatever that thing hanging from his neck. I'll guarantee once we get down to the bottom of all this, not only was he an incel, not only was he visiting massage parlors and probably not getting the handy that comes along with it, not only that, but he was probably some extreme religious type that felt entitled. And somehow we got to move away from this. Somehow we've got to, you believe what you got to believe and don't impose it on anybody else. This is a very libertarian view. Nobody's going to say, oh, you're a radical liberal. No, this is a fairly libertarian view. Leave me alone. Leave people alone to lead their lives. It's crazy. But the weird thing is those aren't the craziest things that happened this week. The day after you had the goofy looking kid with the whatever that is growing from his neck go in and shoot a bunch of people, you had 172 Republicans. Now understand, 7 women were killed in that Atlanta shooting. You had 172 Republicans in the House who voted against renewing the Violence Against Women Act. How do you do that? Now, this has been the law of the land. This is just renewing it. How do you do that the day after that kind of a massacre? I mean, it's crazy to me, but it's not surprising because it is what we do. It's what's happened in this country. Because we have this weird kind of dynamic. I guarantee you, if this was a black guy who went in and shot 7 people working at a hair salon, there'd be a whole hell of a lot more outcry. And I doubt that shooter would have made it back to the police station unscathed. Unlike this neckbeard, and that think back to Dylan Roof, the guy who walked into a black church, prayed with them, and then shot a bunch of people in Charleston, South Carolina. They actually took him out for lunch. I mean, it's crazy where we are. And I look at, just, and it comes back to our leaders. Our leaders are nuts. Look at Congress. You got this Paul Gosar, Republican representative from Arizona. he was one of the guys who started at one of these QAnon groups gatherings. One of these white supremacist groups, and their QAnon people went on their talk show. I guess according to him, DC only sends the GOP only sends the best over to Washington. And this is a guy who's spewing the same kind of conspiracy nonsense. One of the guys who was, out there spewing all the election fraud. And speaking of someone spewing the election fraud, speaking of someone who, was part of the Republican picnic / riot insurrection on January 6th, you've got this dingbat, this Lauren Boebert, gun fetish Barbie, who this week claimed, and amazingly so. I mean, she said a lot of dumb things, but she said, quote, "I think we can take back the majority in the House and the Senate before 2020. And you look at this and she goes, is she planning on taking some of those guns off the shelf and shooting some people? Because the only way that that's happening is if some people are dying. Is she calling for another insurrection? Is she calling for a massacre? What is she calling for? Or is it, and look, I'm giving her the benefit of the doubt here. I am really going to give Lauren Boebert the benefit of the doubt and just say she's freaking stupid. That she's probably the stupidest person in the House of Representatives. I'm gonna go there. And the reason I say that, this is not me being mean. This is not me attacking her. This is me simply pointing out the reality of the fact that she doesn't understand how our system works because she says that we shouldn't be able to change the Constitution whenever we don't like something. Shouldn't be able to do it. Yet, and here's the part of this that where you go, oh yeah, she's stupid. She signed on to an amendment to amend the Constitution. She didn't like something. She signed on to something that would change the Constitution that she says we can't change when we don't like something. I mean, this is my problem here. Look, I understand if you're truly ideological and you're between the curves on your ideology. If what you're saying makes sense and it's consistent. The problem is these people are all over the map because they believe what they believe and they want everything else to fix and to fit in with their bizarre beliefs. Like we can't change the Constitution unless we want to. I don't know what that means, but there it is. Now you moved from Lauren gun fetish Barbie Boebert over to Ron Johnson, senator from Wisconsin. He came out and said, he wasn't afraid during the GOP picnic / riot insurrection cop killing event. He wasn't afraid at all. And he clarified that he may have been upset. He may have been afraid if there were black people there, but he's not a racist. Had this been a Black Lives Matter rally, he'd have been really, really afraid. But since it was a bunch of white people killing a cop, yeah, that's okay. A U.S. senator said this. I mean, we are now in the era of the former president. And all of the idiotic rhetoric that he has thrown out. It's crazy to me. It's bizarre. But these are who these people are. I know they're not racist. Let's look at Tennessee. Evidently, and I didn't know this until I read the story, evidently in Tennessee's Constitution, slavery can be used as a criminal punishment. It's inculcated in their Constitution. I had to go look it up. And they want to try and change, the people of Tennessee want to try and change their Constitution. Lauren Boebert, obviously against the idea of changing a Constitution unless she wants to change it. But they want to change this and take the stain of slavery off of the state of Tennessee. And I fully agree with that. It's a good idea. 4 Republicans, 3 white guys and a white woman against it. Guess which party they're members of? Yeah, you didn't have to really guess. You know, they're Republicans. And you look at this and you just go, how insane is this party, and how far off the rails have they gone? And that was the crazy part of it. I'll tell you the good news. The good news is Joe Biden is doing the work that we want him to do. Today, we hit 100 million people vaccinated. That is a huge thing that is moving us in the right direction. And look, he said it was going to be 100 million people in 100 days. Today, day 58, done. And what did we hear from the right wing today? Not, hey, Joe, good job. Yeah, thanks a lot, man. You're doing a good job. No. We heard mockery because he tripped climbing the stairs into Air Force One. Oh, he's weak and feeble. Oh, he can't even walk. Oh, can't even lift up his feet. You know what? I'll take that feeble old guy any day. Because you know what he did? He got up. And for me, I'll take him every day because he's a fighter. He fell, yeah, and he got up. And he fell again, and he got up again. I like that. And you know what I like even more? He promised he was going to get something done, and he got it done. 100 million people vaccinated in 58 days. We got the American Rescue Plan pushed through. Good stuff. Doing the work. Also today we find out that, remember, we talked about this over the last couple of years, that students who were defrauded by those for-profit scam universities, we know the names. They do a lot of heavy advertising at like 3 o'clock in the morning. And now we're mostly, gone or consolidated in other places. Basically, the people who are ripping off our government through the GI Bill and ripping off students through that. Evidently, the story came out today that those students who were defrauded by those for-profit universities, and I can't call them universities, those for-profit, what's a good word for a fake university? We'll just go with fake universities. Evidently, they're going to withdraw. They're going to eliminate about $1 billion in student loan debt to about 72,000 borrowers. And I think that's a good thing. Now, it's a good thing. Yes, it is. We got to do something with everybody else who's got these obscene student loans. We've got to do some major structural changes on how we fund education. But more importantly than all that, to me, and look, those 72,000 students are going to be, those people are going to be okay. And that's a good thing. I want those people who defrauded them locked up. Now, during the Trump years, they did everything they could do to do nothing. In fact, Trump vetoed, some legislation that would have gotten us moving in that direction. Billionaire Betsy actually did some revisions of a program that, to tighten the debt forgiveness. Congress tried to overturn it last March. The former guy vetoed it. I want to see these people go to jail. The same thing I wanted to see in 2009 with all the people who crashed our economy. The same thing I want to see of all those people who helped the GOP picnic / riot insurrection cop killing event. I want to see them going to jail. I want to see our Justice Department pursue those criminals with the same vigor and the same enthusiasm that they go after a poor black guy in Philadelphia who stole 3 peppermint patties. I want to see them go after with the same kind of anger and the same kind of passion that they did with a guy selling loose cigarettes on the streets of New York, or being accused of passing a fake $20 bill, which they've never even proved or come near. I want to see them go after those criminals in the same way they go after those folks. I'd like to see the rich criminals locked up, and no country clubs. They go to jail. Just my thought. Quick break. Right back.
Then workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day the United States Supreme Court upheld the Adamson Act. The act had initially been passed and signed into law the previous September to avoid a nationwide railway strike. It established the 8-hour workday and overtime pay for interstate railroad workers. The 4 railroad brotherhoods, the engineers, firemen, brakemen, and conductors, had been pushing for these terms since at least 1915. When the railroads refused to budge, the unions prepared to strike. It was the first federal law that sought to determine minimum wages and maximum hours for private industry. The railroads were furious with President Woodrow Wilson for demanding quick passage of the law. They filed the case Wilson versus New, which challenged the constitutionality of the act. The railroads refused to abide by the new law while they waited for their case to be heard, ultimately by the U.S. Supreme Court. The 4 railroad brotherhoods grew tired of waiting and organized for another strike. The court rejected the railroads' claim and upheld the act. President Wilson had hoped to ensure labor peace as the United States was on the cusp of entering World War I. Seen as a powerful victory for the unions, the railway employees pressed for similar demands. When the industry looked as though it was headed for yet another strike, President Wilson exercised the Army Appropriations Act and issued an executive order at the end of 1917 that placed the railroads under federal control. This nationalized the railroad industry into 3 divisions under the newly established United States Railroad Administration between the years of 1917 and 1920. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the good news is the American Rescue Plan money is getting out into people's pockets. I got mine. I know a bunch of people who also got it. I think this is going to help our economy. It's going to do some really good things. Now, as we've been saying all week, I got the right wing crying and whining. Oh, nobody's going to spend it. They're just going to save it. It's going to be poorly targeted. We're just going to give it to those people. It's going to put more debt. It's going to cause inflation. A lot of problems. A lot of whining. And as I've said, if you don't want it, I've got an account you can forward it to, or we can get it to people who actually do need it. Because I think we need demand in our economy, and we need help to help people get through these next couple of months if we're going to beat this virus. And here to share some thoughts on, well, the American Rescue Plan and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing that people save a couple of these bucks, I've asked our good friend Pedro da Costa to come talk with us. Pedro is the senior reporter over at Market News, I think. Pedro, thanks for taking time for us.
My pleasure. How are you?
I'm good. So what do you say to the argument, Pedro, that this is just a waste of money? We're bailing out blue states. We're bailing out those union states. We're giving it to people who don't need it, who are going to probably save it. It's not going to move the needle any. It's going to cause inflation. It's everything horrible except for something that could actually help. What do you say to that?
Well, I think the idea that Wall Street's primary worry is now that the economy would actually end up running too hot because of this package tells you everything you need to know. And by the way, you can't have those two arguments, right? If it's going to be saved, then it won't cause inflation. And so it's either one or the other problem. And I don't think we have either, to your point, at the moment, because there is a huge shortfall of demand and there is a very high level of unemployment. Wall Street's been kind of second guessing. The basic worry now on Wall Street is that the mix of very low interest rates and this newly active fiscal policy is going to generate inflation. But that's a problem the Fed would like to have, because the problem for the Fed is that there's been too high unemployment and too low inflation because of lack of demand. So that's kind of the goal for now. And so we'll see where we head from here. But the idea that we're making a lot faster progress on the recovery than previously thought, even as far as a few months ago, is pretty upbeat.
No, it's just pretty good. And now here's the thing, I look at this as a fundamental shift in policy. moving away from the Reaganomics model of, tax cuts for the very wealthy. That's how we get any activity in our economy. And this going, hey, no, we're going to give people money at the bottom. We're going to be on the demand side of things. We're going to push out to create demand, to get business moving. This is a fundamental shift from, hey, we're just going to give rich people a whole bunch of money and hopefully something will trickle down on my head.
It is a fairly fundamental policy shift from the last administration. We'll see, if there's an additional infrastructure push following this bill. But I think the larger point is that, we went from, and the complaints are interesting because, I follow the markets closely, and Wall Street was forever complaining that monetary policy was the only game in town and that the Fed couldn't do it alone and the fiscal policy needed to kick in. Now that fiscal policy kicked in, Wall Street is suddenly worried about inflation. Wall Street is a little bit of a spoiled child. So now, but that's, again, as I was saying, that's kind of a luxurious problem to have for now. And so, again, this package represents a huge shift, right? And I think the Georgia elections we underestimated what a difference it made. We'd forget that as of December, we didn't even know that we were going to get that $900 billion, right? So not only did we get that, now there's a prospect for not just a continuous stream of fiscal spending, but also a shift in the composition of taxation and spending, to your point.
No, and we're
probably going to get some tax reform coming up as well. So.
That's the hope. And you've got Joe Manchin coming out saying he wants to see taxes raised, and I think we need it. I think we need to move back to the policies that we've had a couple of generations ago, where you have government investment and large government spending on things like infrastructure, and we tax the very wealthy and corporations to pay for it. To me, this is where we've been needing to go back to for a while.
The infrastructure piece of it seems fairly obvious to anybody who kind of travels around the country, right? My worst nightmare example is Penn Station in New York, the train station. I just think of it as just a national embarrassment, because if you think of the train systems in Europe and China and Japan, and we should be able to get from DC to New York to, I think the worst example that I saw was if our trains were as fast as the Chinese ones, we'd be able to get from New York to Chicago in like 4 to 6 hours or something.
Yeah.
Imagine the productivity gains you could get from that you could do a day trip to Chicago from New York. So we have a lot of advancement to make. So there's a lot of room for productive investment. There's always going to be room for waste as well. There's going to be concern about that. But
even a little bit of waste, I don't think is a bad thing. I think it's still, it's demand in the economy, and it's still creating jobs in my view.
Well, I don't know about waste in particular, but the issue of people saving versus not, I don't think that's particularly damaging, especially in the wake of something like a pandemic. You might have a natural propensity of people to save more anyway, because they're just more afraid of the future, right? We've just gone through a shock. So the fact that there's the notion that we have a high savings rate now, and that's going to lead to this huge burst of spending, that might be true initially, and that's why there's the inflation worry. But inflation would be something persistent. Jay Powell made the point this week. My favorite quote from his press conference was, "You can go out to dinner a lot, but you can't sort of make up for the dinners that you didn't go out for."
Right.
And so I think what he said is you can only go out to dinner once a night. And so, I mean, I guess you could go twice. I think I've done it twice, but I don't think that the spending is going to necessarily be damaging to the economy. To the contrary, we still have, if Jay Powell is correct, and if you account for the labor force participation damage from the crisis, the de facto unemployment rate is actually around 10%. And so, you do need the demand.
Yeah, and you look, the pandemic took some obscene number, like 20 million jobs?
20 million jobs, of which we've only made up about 11.5 million. So, 9.5 million to go. But that's actually not even a good benchmark, because that would mean that after however long it takes us to that full recovery, we'd made no progress. But if we had stayed on the path that we were at with like 3.5% unemployment in February of 2020 without the pandemic, we would have that many more million jobs by the end of next year.
What do you say to the person who's worried? Because I had a guy who's just losing his mind that we're making all the same mistakes we made back 100 years ago. We're just reliving the days before the Great Depression. We're going to get into the Roaring 20s, and then in the 30s we're going to go into a depression. You said he told me I can bet on it, and has he got any point there? I mean, are we reliving the end of the Spanish flu into the Roaring 20s?
It's hard to make those historical comparisons, to be honest. And I think some of the fear related to the Great Depression is some of the valid fear in terms of the relationship is that there was the 1929 stock market crash, and then there was the Great Depression, right? There is a concern that markets are at a point where like they've been rallying too far and there's a lot of money in the system. I think those are valid concerns, concerns about ranging from GameStop to Bitcoin. And kind of retail investors potentially getting played and just, the market just being frothy in a way that a bubble that could pop in a way that could be damaging. But I think in terms of the policy apparatus and how how fiscal policy, how monetary policy might react to such a crash, I think it's unlikely that we'd have anything like the Great Depression. The Great Depression was a product of a general economic stance that was, absolutely laissez-faire beyond anything that we understand today. Right. And so I don't think, 2008 was a clear example of like, no matter how bad even though it was really bad, they won't let it get that bad. There's a point at which the authorities will step in and just not let it happen.
The bankers don't have to worry about taking to the ledge anymore. And I'll be honest with you, in 2008, I was kind of hoping they would. And I know that sounds horrible, but they did some really horrible things to our economy, and a lot of people suffered because of it.
Well, that was the horrible thing about the crisis, and the thing that I think pained, to be honest, Fed officials like Chairman, Bernanke himself for having to do the bailouts that he did, and because the culprits were bailed out because they made themselves so systemic that they had to be comforted, and you could argue in hindsight about how far it needed to go and whether the Fed could have intervened in different ways to prevent capital from bleeding out of the system, especially after Bear Stearns collapsed. But yeah, I mean, I think you could have had more individual accountability as far as the heads of institutions, the accounting firms that approved there's a whole system that allowed those firms to get to the financial state that they did, that was, legal, but reprehensible. And so that's a whole nother story.
And we wrote them a really big check and bailed them out, as we've done in every crisis of my lifetime, at least. Every time the savings alone, every time a bank gets into trouble, Uncle Sam rides in with the checkbook. But I kept getting we're going broke, Pedro. We're running out of money, and we can't afford this. And the same thing I'm hearing about infrastructure. I'm saying we need a big infrastructure plan, somewhere around $3 to $4 trillion, a massive investment to change, our entire economy and move us kicking and screaming into the 21st century. What do you say to the argument that we just can't afford it?
I would say look at the rate of interest in the 10-year Treasury note. It's been rising a little bit, but the cost of borrowing for the U.S. government is near, record lows. And so the affordability of the U.S. interest burden, even though the level of the deficit is high and the national debt is high, the interest burden is serviceable and manageable for the foreseeable future. So,
I always, whenever I think of infrastructure, I think of Thomas Friedman, and I'm not a big Thomas Friedman fan. But he had a great line during one of his speeches. He said he returned from China to Los Angeles. I went from Beijing to LAX, and it was like going from the Jetsons to the Flintstones. And I thought that was really a great line. And it really showed, with us, of course, being the Flintstones. Because if you look around at our infrastructure, how far we're behind, we've been talking about doing a massive investment for a couple of decades now. I mean, they were talking about it during the Bush years, all during the Obama years. And we had infrastructure week every week of the Trump years, and yet we can't seem to get it done. Do you see this being the next piece of legislation that they move through budget reconciliation?
I definitely think so, but I think it's going to be a lot more contentious than this bill because it's going to be seen. I think even within, I think we're getting to the stage now where the level of consensus, even within the Democratic Party, is going to be a little bit less, and the mansions of the world are going to be louder about the deficit. And the noise that you hear about the deficit is already, very loud. So I think there's going to be some pushback. But I definitely think something will go through. The momentum is there. And, Biden got people thought that the original $1.9 billion proposal would get scaled down to $1 trillion. That didn't happen. He got his full deal.
Yeah, 1.9 trillion. It's almost hard to imagine trillion with a T as opposed to billion. I mean, we skipped right on past the billion, went right to the trillion number, which just sometimes makes me go, holy, what?
Well, the rescue package to the financial crisis in 2008, which arguably was much worse in terms of like the lasting severity, the chances that it would last for a long time, was so much smaller. It was $800 billion, and there was a lot of debate about how whether it should be larger or smaller. But there was a consensus afterwards that it was too small, and so I think there was a lesson learned from that you go big and you do it early. That's also the lesson that the Fed is applying. I think there's a sense of fear that like anytime you go big, I think even the people who want to go big are like, oh my God, I hope we're doing the right thing, and I think that's a healthy sense of caution, but it is the direction that he promised. So
I would prefer to be on the side of going bigger than smaller and getting things a little more heated up than necessary, because at the end of the day, it's going to help people at the bottom. And if we can get an infrastructure plan pushed through, and also maybe couple that with the PRO Act so we can make those jobs good union jobs, I think this could be a good thing for the country and really shift how our economy is built.
From the Fed's perspective, the reason they're so emphasizing the fact that they're going to not start raising interest rates until the economy is much, much stronger is that they see this risk. There's nothing they can do when interest rates are already at zero. I mean, there's stuff they can do. They buy bonds, but they feel uncomfortable doing this stuff. They feel much more comfortable raising rates if they need to, and they know what to do in that case. So they know how to deal with a little bit of inflation a lot better than they know how to deal with disinflation, which is what we've had over the last 10 years.
Yeah, last question I've got for you. I'm looking at Europe, and they're looking at closing down again because their COVID variants are I guess raging out of control. Do you see that happening here? Are we prepared for that economically? Does this help us get through anything like that? How do you see that playing out?
I don't see it happening here because I think we're getting there as far as vaccines. I mean, there's a chance that like if variants spread and then there's renewed travel concerns. I mean, not you talk about Europe, but my parents live in Brazil, and that's like the epicenter now, and South Africa is really bad. Other developing countries just are a total mess, and the vaccine schedule is kind of non-existent. So there's a chance that it could like echo back to us. I think for now it's not going to happen, and we will be out of the woods by summer. But I think the risk is that people remain reluctant, and that patterns change, that maybe people get used to staying more at home and doing less, and that the economy just will remain kind of subdued and it will take longer to recover.
Yeah, I think my wife and I are the only ones who are going, I kind of like the idea that we're not going out all the time. I kind of like the idea that we're saving a little bit of money. Maybe we're going to try and do that afterwards. But everybody I know, they can't wait to go back to ripping and tearing.
I don't know. I wonder, I hear a lot of that too. I wonder how much people are like talking this game outwardly and they don't really I don't know.
No,
I'm kind of in your camp. I appreciate the comforts of home quite a bit these days, but we're the lucky ones that have the ability to work remotely. So we've talked about how precious that commodity is.
No, I've been very fortunate my family's been very fortunate through all of this. That we were prepared from the beginning. We got a decent sized house so we could separate from each other. We've done fairly well. The hope is that we get through this with everybody. The vaccines get into people's arms and we move forward to the other side. But Pedro, I appreciate the time as always. Good talking to you, man.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Rick.
Our good friend Pedro da Costa, senior reporter at Market News. You can check out his work. We'll get some links out. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1834. That was the day that 6 Englishmen, who would become known as the Toll Puddle Martyrs, were sentenced to 7 years transportation to the penal colony of Australia. Their crime? Forming a union. The men were farm laborers who had seen their wages cut 3 times in 3 years. They began to meet to discuss forming a union, sometimes holding their gatherings under a large. It had recently become legal for English workers to join trade unions. But many government officials had little interest in working people banding together. The magistrates, working on behalf of the landowners, accused the union leaders of violating an obscure law against taking a secret oath. The defendants were sentenced to the brutal passage to the Australia colony for the so-called crime of pledging their solidarity to their union brothers. Few prisoners ever returned from a sentence to Australia. The judge presiding over the case called the punishment, quote, an example and a warning. Learning of his sentence, one of the convicted men wrote the lyrics of a popular Union song on a piece of paper. We raise the watchword liberty. We will be free. Public outrage over the harsh sentence quickly grew. 800,000 signed a petition demanding the return of the 6 union leaders. The organized protest garnered results. After serving 3 years of their sentences, the exiled Union men were granted free passage home. The sycamore tree that sheltered their meetings became a symbol of the trade union movement in England. Every July, thousands of people attend the Toll Pool Martyrs Festival to celebrate trade unionism and to remember the sacrifices of the 6 farm workers.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as you know, I've been talking about how I think the American Rescue Plan is something that's transformational. I think the administration is doing a lot of the right things, and I am 100% behind the things that I think that they're doing right, especially the fact that the administration is out promoting people joining and forming unions. They had that historic announcement that Biden had, that 2-minute video. Day one, by 5 o'clock, they fired Peter Robb and his right-hand woman. Huge, in my view, the number of executive orders that undid a lot of the stuff that the last guy tried to pull. The question is Biden that much better than the last guy? And the answer to me is yes, but there are some questions. And there are some people who I think have some serious flaws. And it brings me to the question of, can you ever find people who don't? And here to share some thoughts on, well, maybe some of the people that in the administration now that maybe would be better off not. I'm going to ask our good friend Jeff Hauser to come talk with us. Jeff is the executive director of the Revolving Door Project there at the Center for Economic Policy and Research. They've got a new piece out talking about, public financial disclosures reveal conflicts of interest facing Biden appointees. Jeff, thanks for taking time for us.
Anytime, Rick.
So what kind of interests, what kind of conflicts are we finding with the Biden appointees?
Well, a lot of Biden appointees are unsurprisingly Obama alumni, and a lot of Obama alumni spent the Trump years not fighting against Trump, but rather cashing in on the insight that they had built in their public service and selling that insight to the highest bidder, which is all too often the largest corporations in America and sometimes more international oriented business.